After working an 18-hour hospital shift, Ethan Ward wanted nothing more than to drop his bag, shower, and collapse into bed. The night was quiet, the streetlights throwing long shadows across the yard. His legs felt heavy as he climbed the porch steps, every muscle aching from the long shift. He reached for the key, but when he slid it into the lock, it wouldn't turn. Confused, he tried again, jiggling it with tired hands. Nothing. The lock had been changed. His chest tightened as he knocked on the door, calling for his father. Instead, the door creaked open a few inches, and Marla's face appeared. She didn't look surprised to see him standing there. Her lips curved in a thin smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You don't live here anymore, Ethan," she said flatly. "This is my house now." For a moment, Ethan just stared at her, certain he had misheard. His father, Charles Ward, had built this home years ago with Ethan's late mother. Every wall carried memories, family dinners, birthdays, the sound of his mother's laughter echoing down the hall. Now, with a single sentence, Marla had pushed him out. "Where's Dad?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "He's away," Marla replied, her hand tightening on the door. "And even if he was here, it wouldn't matter. You're not welcome." Ethan's throat burned, but words refused to come. Exhaustion weighed him down, and yet the sting of betrayal cut deeper than any lack of sleep. He stepped back as the door shut in his face, leaving him on the porch in the cool night air, holding a useless key to a house that no longer felt like his home. Ethan stood on the porch, knuckles raw from pounding on the door, the sound echoing in the quiet neighborhood. He called Marla's name, then his father's, but no footsteps came from inside. He pressed his ear against the wood, listening for movement, and caught only silence. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out, dialing his father's number. Straight to voicemail. He tried again, then again, until the automated voice became a cruel reminder that no one was going to answer. When he called Marla, she picked up on the second ring. Her voice carried that same sharp tone she always used with him. "Stop wasting your time, Ethan. I told you already, you're not welcome here. You can't just lock me out. This is my father's house." "I live here," he said, gripping the phone tight. "You lived here," she corrected. "Your father isn't here to deal with this, and I don't owe you an explanation. You're a grown man, you'll figure it out." The line clicked dead before he could speak again. Ethan lowered the phone, his pulse hammering in his temples. His father had told him he'd be visiting an old friend a few towns over. It hadn't seemed important at the time, but now Ethan couldn't shake the thought that Marla had waited until he was gone to pull this. He tried calling a couple of colleagues from the hospital. One finally answered, surprised to hear from him so late. After listening to a short, shaky explanation, she told him he could crash on her couch for the night. With nowhere else to go, Ethan grabbed the small duffel he had carried from work and started the walk back to his car. By the time he reached his coworker's apartment, his body felt heavier than stone. She showed him the couch, offered a blanket, and left him alone. Ethan sank down, unable to shake the image of Marla's smug face at the door. The humiliation stung almost as much as the exhaustion. He had been thrown out of the home his mother once filled with warmth, and he hadn't even been given the chance to argue. As he lay staring at the ceiling, small details began clicking into place. The way Marla had pushed for more control over household finances, the way she always insisted Charles keep Ethan out of family discussions. She had been cutting him out piece by piece, making sure that when the moment came, he would have nothing to stand on. Ethan closed his eyes, replaying her words in his head. "This is my house now." It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. She had planned this, waiting for his father to be out of reach, knowing Ethan would be too tired to fight back. The couch was uncomfortable, the blanket too thin against the night chill, but sleep claimed him in fits. Each time he drifted off, he woke again, restless and hollow. Tomorrow he would drag himself back to the hospital, wearing the same clothes, pretending everything was fine. But the thought that refused to leave him was that Marla had more power than he realized, and she wasn't going to stop at just changing the locks. Ethan woke early, though his body begged for more rest. The stiff couch left his back sore, but it wasn't the discomfort that pulled him from sleep, it was the ache in his chest. He sat up slowly, running a hand over his face, and his thoughts carried him back to the house. Not just the place, but what it had always meant. He could still picture his mother standing in the yard years ago, sunlight falling across her hair as she pointed at the half-built frame of the home. She had saved every penny she could, convincing his father to take on extra jobs so they could build it together. It wasn't just another house. It was her dream made real. Ethan had been 12 when they moved in, and he remembered her laughter when she unlocked the door for the first time. She had insisted they eat pizza on the bare floor before furniture arrived, calling it the first memory of many. Every corner carried a piece of her. The kitchen smelled of her Sunday roasts long after she was gone. The living room still echoed with family movie nights where she would fall asleep halfway through. Even the hallway had marks on the wall where she measured Ethan's height each year, celebrating every inch with a proud smile. That house was more than wood and nails, it was proof of her love. When she passed, the silence inside those walls nearly broke him. His father mourned, but only for a short time. Within months, Charles introduced Marla. Ethan had been stunned by how fast it happened. One day, it was just the two of them, clinging to memories of his mother, and the next there was this woman with sharp eyes and a voice that left no room for. Marla had made her intentions clear from the start. She moved furniture around, changed curtains, replaced photos of Ethan's mother with her own pictures. Every trace of the woman who had built the house began to fade. When Ethan protested, Charles brushed it off, saying they needed a fresh start. But to Ethan it wasn't fresh, it was erasure. The home that once felt safe grew unfamiliar with every change. Marla wanted control, and slowly she got it. She took over household decisions, handled bills, and reminded Ethan he was just a guest whenever he questioned her. Lying on the couch that morning, Ethan pieced it together more clearly than before. Marla wasn't simply trying to make her mark. She was claiming everything: his father, the house, even his mother's memory. The locks were only the latest step in a plan she had been following for years. The thought twisted in his chest. It wasn't about a roof over his head. It was about his mother's dream being stolen, her presence erased by someone who had never cared for her or the work she put into that home. Losing the house meant losing her all over again, and that was something Ethan couldn't accept. Ethan waited 2 days before his father finally came back. He drove straight to the house, tired but determined to clear up the mess Marla had started. He expected anger, maybe confusion, but he thought Charles would listen once he explained. When his father's truck pulled into the driveway, Ethan felt a brief spark of relief. Charles stepped out, looking older than Ethan remembered. His shoulders slumped as if carrying invisible weight. Ethan walked up quickly, words rushing out. "Dad, she locked me out. She said I don't live here anymore. You know this isn't right." Charles didn't answer at first. He glanced at the door where Marla stood watching, arms crossed. Finally, he sighed. "Ethan, you're 27. You're working. You can stand on your own now." The words cut deeper than Ethan expected. He stared at his father, searching his face for hesitation, for some sign this was a mistake. But Charles avoided his eyes. Marla stepped closer, her voice sharp. "You've had plenty of time here. It's not your place anymore. We need our own space, and you need to move forward with your life." "Move forward," Ethan repeated, his voice low. "This house is part of my life. It was Mom's." Marla's mouth twisted into a thin smile. "Your mother's gone, Ethan. It's time you stopped living in the past." Ethan's chest tightened. He turned to his father again, waiting for him to defend the home, to defend him. But Charles only rubbed the back of his neck and muttered, "She's right. You'll be fine. You've always been strong." Ethan's hands curled into fists at his sides. Before he could speak again, Marla opened the door wider, revealing cardboard boxes stacked neatly on the porch. His clothes, books, and a few personal items were crammed inside, taped shut without care. His entire life, packed and dumped like trash waiting for collection. He stepped forward, pulling at one of the boxes. A sweater fell out, wrinkled and stuffed beneath shoes. At the bottom, a picture frame rattled loose, glass chipped from being shoved in without thought. He bent to pick it up, the sight of his mother's smile behind the cracked glass making his throat tighten. Marla's voice broke the moment. "Don't make a scene. You'll thank us later when you finally grow up." Ethan turned his head slowly, meeting her cold gaze. Every word she spoke felt like another shove out the door. But what cut deepest wasn't Marla's cruelty. It was the silence from his father. The man who had once promised to protect him, to keep the family together, now stood quietly behind her, nodding along as if her words were law. Ethan carried the box to his car, each step heavy. Rage simmered beneath his skin, but so did something worse: heartbreak. His father had chosen Marla, not him. Chosen convenience over loyalty, silence over truth. As he loaded the last box, Ethan realized this wasn't just about being locked out. It was about being abandoned by the one person he thought would never turn away. Ethan spent the next week trying to push through his shifts at the hospital while the weight of what happened sat on his shoulders. The couch he was sleeping on belonged to a friend who didn't ask many questions, but Ethan couldn't keep living like that. He needed answers, and he needed to know where he stood when it came to the house. One afternoon, after finishing another long shift, he went to speak with a lawyer recommended by a colleague. He explained everything: the house, his mother's role in building it, and how Marla had locked him out. The lawyer listened carefully, flipping through notes before asking who actually owned the property. Ethan frowned at the question, certain the deed was still under his father's name. It had been his father's and mother's home from the beginning. When the lawyer pulled the latest property record, Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. The house wasn't under Charles's name anymore. It had been transferred to Marla months ago. Her name alone filled the record, stamped and sealed. Ethan stared at the document, unable to understand how it had happened without his knowledge. The lawyer explained that if Charles had willingly signed the transfer, there was little Ethan could do. Inheritance rights no longer applied, because the property no longer belonged to his father. It belonged entirely to Marla. Even if something happened to Charles, Ethan would get nothing from the home his mother had dreamed of. Ethan sat frozen in the chair, his jaw tight. He thought back to recent months, how Marla had handled every piece of mail, every bill, every conversation about money. His father had started stepping back, letting her take charge. Ethan had assumed it was laziness or comfort, but now he saw it clearly. She had been preparing this move for a long time, cutting him out in silence while convincing Charles it was for the best. When he asked if there was any way to fight it, the lawyer shook his head. Unless Ethan could prove fraud or coercion, there was no case. From the outside, it looked like Charles had willingly handed everything over to his wife. Ethan walked out of the office with a folder of papers he didn't want to hold. On the sidewalk, he stopped, staring down at the pages. His mother's effort, her sacrifices, all of it had been erased with a single signature. Marla hadn't just locked him out. She had stripped him of every right, making sure he had no claim, no voice, nothing to protect. The betrayal twisted deeper than before. This wasn't just a cruel act of shutting a door in his face. It was a calculated theft, designed to leave him powerless. Marla hadn't acted on impulse. She had been planning, waiting, shaping the situation until Ethan had no ground to stand on. That night, lying awake again on the narrow couch, Ethan realized the truth. His stepmother wasn't satisfied with pushing him aside. She wanted to erase him completely. And his father, whether through weakness or blindness, had helped her do it. The days blurred together. Ethan worked double shifts, barely eating, barely resting, just moving from one patient to the next. His co-workers noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands trembled when he reached for coffee, but no one asked. He didn't have the strength to explain. When the long hours ended, he had nowhere of his own to go. Some nights he stayed on a colleague's couch, other nights in the hospital's on-call room. Each time he woke, the same thought returned. He had been cut off from the only place that ever felt like home. His father didn't call. Marla didn't answer his messages. The boxes of his belongings sat stacked in the corner of a borrowed living room, half unpacked because he couldn't bring himself to sort through them. Every shirt, every photo, reminded him of what he had lost. One night, after a grueling shift that stretched until midnight, Ethan drove instead of going to the apartment. His hands gripped the steering wheel as if they had a mind of their own, guiding him toward the street he had avoided for weeks. The neighborhood looked the same, quiet houses, trimmed lawns, porch lights glowing. But when he pulled up in front of his father's house, something in his chest broke. The windows were lit, curtains drawn. He could see the outline of Marla moving inside. For a moment, Ethan sat in the car, frozen. Then he stepped out, the cool night air brushing his face. He walked slowly across the yard, his eyes lifting to the second-story window. That had been his mother's room. She used to open the window in the summer, letting fresh air drift through while she hummed as she folded laundry. As a boy, he had often sat on the floor of that room, listening to her stories about the life she dreamed for him. Now the window was dark, closed, silent. Ethan stood beneath it, the grass damp under his shoes, and felt the weight of everything settle over him. Marla had taken the home, the deed, even his father's loyalty. But this window, this memory, belonged to his mother, and he refused to let it be erased. His fists clenched at his sides, not from anger alone but from resolve. For weeks he had let exhaustion drag him down, letting despair eat away at him. But staring up at that window, Ethan felt something shift. This wasn't just about being thrown out. It was about his mother's legacy, about the promise that her love and sacrifice would not be buried under Marla's control. He whispered into the night, more to himself than to anyone listening. I won't let her win. Not here. Not with this. The bitterness inside him hardened into something sharper, colder. He couldn't fight this with pleading or with hope that his father would come to his senses. If Marla wanted to play with lies and control, he would find a way to break her grip. Ethan turned back to his car with steady steps. The despair that had weighed on him was still there, but now it carried a new edge. He wasn't just a son cast aside anymore. He was a man with a purpose. And from that night forward, Marla would no longer see him as weak. Ethan began to move carefully, the same way he approached a patient with symptoms that didn't add up. He reminded himself of the skills he used every day: patience, observation, detail. If Marla had managed to twist everything in her favor, then there had to be something she didn't want his father to see. All he needed was proof. He started small. On his days off, he drove by the house to see when Charles was alone. After a few tries, he caught him outside one afternoon, watering the garden. Ethan pulled up, stepping out slowly, so as not to startle him. His father looked uneasy, glancing toward the door as if worried Marla might appear, but Ethan kept his voice calm. "I'm not here to fight," he said. "I just want to talk." They sat on the porch. The conversation was stiff at first, Charles repeating the same lines about Ethan being old enough to make his own way. But Ethan listened, nodding, letting the words pass without argument. Then, with quiet care, he asked, "Dad, are you sure you know everything about her?" Charles frowned, confused. Ethan leaned in slightly. "People hide things. You've always told me trust is earned. Just make sure she's being honest with you." He didn't press further. He left his father with a thought planted, a seed that might grow in silence. In the weeks that followed, Ethan began gathering pieces. He stopped by the bank where his mother once kept their accounts, speaking with an old clerk who remembered the family. A few questions here, a bit of patience there, and he learned Marla had opened several credit lines in her own name. Some were maxed out, payments behind. Later, through a contact at the hospital who had a brother working in collections, Ethan discovered more. Marla wasn't just careless, she was in deep. Gambling charges appeared on statements, large withdrawals at odd hours, minimum payments barely keeping accounts alive. It was a web of debt she had managed to hide, probably by convincing Charles to let her handle everything. Ethan kept every receipt, every copied record, neatly organized in a folder. Each page gave him more clarity. This wasn't just about her wanting control of the house. She needed control to cover her own mistakes. His father had been blinded by comfort and trust, and Marla had taken full advantage. For the first time since the night he stood under his mother's window, Ethan felt steady. He didn't need shouting or anger. He didn't need to break down doors. What he needed was light, to pull the curtain back and let his father see the truth Marla had been hiding. Late one evening, Ethan sat at the small kitchen table of his colleague's apartment, the folder spread open before. He touched the pages one by one, his jaw set. Revenge didn't have to be loud. It just had to be precise. And with each new detail, he saw the path more clearly. Marla thought she had cut him out, but he was already working on cutting her off completely. Ethan waited for the right moment. Rushing would only make his father defensive, but too much delay would give Marla more time to tighten her hold. When Charles called one weekend, asking if he wanted to come by for dinner, Ethan knew it was the chance he had been waiting for. His voice stayed calm as he agreed, though his heart beat faster at the thought of walking back into the house. That evening, he arrived with a folder tucked neatly under his arm. Marla opened the door, her expression tightening when she saw him. "Didn't expect you," she said, her voice cool. Ethan only gave a polite nod and stepped past her into the living room where Charles was setting the table. His father seemed pleased, greeting him warmly, though Ethan could see the unease in his eyes. Dinner began with strained small talk. Marla asked about the hospital, her tone laced with disinterest, while Charles tried to keep conversation light. Ethan answered simply, waiting. When the plates were cleared and coffee was poured, he placed the folder on the table. "I need to show you something, Dad," he said quietly. Marla's eyes narrowed. "What now?" Ethan opened the folder, laying out bank statements, credit card bills, and copies of collection notices. Each page was organized, dates highlighted. "These are accounts in Marla's name," he explained. "They've been building for years. Gambling withdrawals, late payments, debts hidden from you." Charles stiffened, his eyes scanning the papers. "That can't be right," he muttered. "She handles the bills. She would have told me." "She didn't," Ethan said firmly. "She's been keeping this from you while putting everything under her control. That's why she wanted the house in her name. It's not about family. It's about covering herself." Marla shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is nonsense," she snapped. "He's lying, twisting everything because he's bitter. Don't listen to him, Charles." Ethan stayed calm, sliding another page forward. "Here's a statement from last month. Minimum payments. Here's a withdrawal from a casino in the city. Do you deny that's your account?" Marla's face flushed, her hands shaking as she tried to grab the papers. "You went digging into my private business? You have no right." Charles raised his voice for the first time. "Marla, stop." His hand hovered over the documents, his eyes moving between her and the evidence. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, he said in a low voice, "Why didn't you tell me?" Marla's mask cracked then. She snapped at him, accusing him of never giving her enough, of not understanding how hard she worked to keep things running. Her voice grew shrill, each word dripping with anger. Ethan sat still, watching as his father's expression shifted from doubt to realization. The pieces clicked together for him the same way they had for Ethan weeks ago. He saw not just the debts, but the manipulation, the secrecy, the way Marla had tried to isolate him from his own son. For the first time in years, Charles didn't side with her. He leaned back in his chair, his face pale. "I trusted you," he whispered. Marla's anger faltered, her eyes darting between them, but the damage was done. The cracks in her facade were finally visible, and Charles couldn't look away.